Are you ready to stuff a pumpkin? Or if not, maybe there's another type of squash you'd like to stuff. You know, I was really inspired by the fall, I guess, to make this recipe because this is such a wonderful time of the year because there's so many wonderful squashes, winter squashes that are around. So we are going to stuff a pumpkin, but if you don't have a pumpkin available to you, there's lots of other things you can use. But let me tell you what I did use. First of all, I bought something called a pie pumpkin. And this pie pumpkin, you'll notice it's a little smaller than the usual pumpkins that you buy for carving. These are actually made for pies, meaning these are made for eating. So they're bred to be really sweet and to be really moist and really smooth when you cook them. So if you want to do this in a pumpkin, I'm just telling you now, be sure you get a pie pumpkin, unless you don't plan to eat the pumpkin itself. But when we make our stuffed pumpkin, we're going to eat the stuffing, we're going to eat the pumpkin as well. So I encourage you, if you want to do it, is to get a pie pumpkin. Don't use your leftovers from Halloween or something that you've carved before. You want to get a pie pumpkin. Now, if you don't have that or you want to use something else, there's lots of other squashes that you can use. This one is kind of your standard winter squash. These are beautiful, these acorn squashes. And for this one, for stuffing, what you can do with this one is just cut it horizontally. All squashes, when you open them up, you know they have that stringy stuff inside and the seeds. You're going to scrape that out. You can just use the two halves of the acorn squash and you can stuff that as well. Another one that's really pretty, and you don't see these as often, this one's called kabocha. I love this one because it's very rustic looking. You'll find them sometimes with a lot of these orange spots on them. They're kind of rough and nubby. And they often have these two knobs on the end, so you'd have to cut those off. And again, you're going to cut it this way across the equator, scrape out the insides, and you can stuff this one as well. So that's a fun one to use. This one is a little harder to stuff, but I wanted to show it because it's so pretty. This one's called delicata. These are all winter squashes. This one, again, like the other ones, it's going to be really pretty and orange inside. You'll scrape out the seeds. You won't be able to put as much stuffing in here, but really, really delicious. And then lastly, our butternut squash. And this is, you know, this is kind of the standard. I've used this in recipes before. I roasted it one time and made some tacos with it. So this one too, you can cut in half, stuff it, delicious. All of these squashes, by the way, are really good sources of vitamin A, which is beta carotene. And beta carotene gets its name, that's where carrots get their name actually, because carotene is that orange pigment. And so that is something that your body converts into vitamin A as it needs it. So they're really, really nutritious, and they're so, so good. And they're really fun for fall. All right, so let me show you what I'm going to do here. We're going to start with our pie pumpkin, and these do come in different sizes. And so this one here, this is a pretty good size one. I found one that was about 2 pounds. And that's one thing about this recipe you're going to notice is that it's going to depend on the size of your pumpkin whether all the stuffing is going to fit. But anyway, I got my 2-pound pie pumpkin, and what I did was I lined this little baking tray with just a little bit of parchment paper because it's going to drip a little bit. And then I scooped out the inside of my pumpkin. So I scraped out all the seeds and all that stringy stuff so it's nice and smooth and pretty inside. So that's all we have to do. We just made this really nice shell. Now, one of the other reasons you have to kind of play around with the timing on this recipe is that the thickness of the pumpkin is going to vary too. Some pie pumpkins have a lot of pumpkin flesh inside and some of them not so much. But anyway, then what we're going to do is we're just going to drizzle a tiny bit of olive oil in the bottom and then sprinkle a little bit of salt and pepper inside, just because I want to season up the pumpkin itself a little bit before we put the stuffing in. All right, so that's it. You don't have to do anything to the top. Just set that aside because we're going to use that. And then the other thing you're going to do to get this ready is you're going to preheat your oven to 350 degrees, okay? All right, now so for our stuffing, what I'm going to be doing is basically doing something very similar to what you would do if you make stuffing for your turkeys. I was kind of going off of that, thinking about all the ingredients that go in there, but rather than using the traditional bread, I wanted to make this a little bit healthier. So we're going to put about a tablespoon of olive oil in our skillet. And I'm going to move this over a little bit so the camera can see it. Oh, I got that pretty hot. And I'm going to put in here a half a cup, of chopped onions and a half a cup of chopped or diced celery and a half cup of mushrooms. So this is pretty standard, right? When you do stuffing, you know, these are kind of the sort of the three that are most commonly put into your stuffing. And then I'm also going to add a half a teaspoon of salt and a half a teaspoon of pepper. Okay. All right, and so this is just going to saute for a minute or two. Let me get that out of the way so I can show you what we're going to do with the rest. We can just kind of, I'll keep an eye on that while we make the rest of the filling. All right, so for the filling, what we're going to do is we are going to start with, we want a total of about 3 cups of cooked grain. And I decided for this one to use brown rice and to use quinoa. Now you can use any cooked grains you want to. I think there's a lot of flexibility there. I think wild rice would be really nice in this one. I chose brown rice and quinoa because I like the texture and I like the color. But if you want to use other grains, go right ahead. All right, so I've got 1.5 cups of cooked brown rice. Now, let me just say something else about that, which is that when you're cooking brown rice, you know, it takes a while, right? It takes about 45 minutes to cook. And when you do that, what I would encourage you to do, if you eat brown rice, you like it. I'm adding, by the way, 1.5 cups of cooked quinoa. When you cook your brown rice, just cook extra and then put it into a freezer container because it freezes beautifully. And it's nice, then that way, you know, if you're making dinner, you don't have to think, oh, I have to wait 45 minutes for my brown rice to cook. It's really nice to just cook a lot. I do that all the time, and I just put it in some containers and stick it in the freezer, and then I always have them, and I can just thaw it out. All right, so I've got 1.5 cups of cooked brown rice, 1.5 cups of cooked quinoa in here. Then I wanted to put in something a little bit sweet. So I'm adding about, I've got here 1/4 cup of dried cranberries because that just seemed kind of ripe for fall. I think there's other dried fruits you could use in here just as well. I think raisins would be great in here. I think you could use dried apples would be really delicious in here. I just like that combination of having a little bit of sweet with, by the way, a little bit savory. And so here I've got 6 tablespoons of Parmesan cheese. And what the Parmesan is going to do, Parmesan adds a little protein, of course. It's going to add a little umami. You know, it's going to give us that sort of almost meaty flavor. It's just, and it's going to give a nice texture to the filling. It's going to help it kind of hold together and bind it up a little bit. And it just tastes great. And Parmesan cheese, by the way, is not that high in fat. So adding 6 tablespoons is not a big deal in our recipe. All right, so we've got that going. Now my veggies are done, and so I'm just going to scrape those into the filling here. So remember, that was 1/2 cup each of onion, celery, and mushrooms. Okay, so we've got that going. Where in the world do I put this? You guys, it's really hard being me doing this all in one thing. All right, so toss all this together. And now what we need to do, though, we have to make something to kind of bind all this together and put it into our pumpkin, right? So this is well mixed. The aroma already, I have to tell you, it's nothing better than simmering onions. It just makes everything better. All right, so let me set that aside for a minute, and then let me pull out my other bowl. So now we need something to hold all this together. And so what we're going to do is we are going to start with 2 eggs, just regular old eggs there, and we're going to beat these up with 1/2 cup of water. You'll see why in a minute. And then I'm also going to add to this a teaspoon of lemon juice. I would say that's totally optional, but when I was testing the recipe and I tasted it, I thought I need a little tang, so I put in a teaspoon of lemon juice. All right, now this is the part I'm so excited about. We launched a product not too long ago here in North America, which is our newest instant soup. This is so exciting. This is a snack soup. It's a chicken and vegetable flavor. Sorry, well, there's a mushroom flavor in another region. Chicken and vegetable flavor. 2 scoops of this mixed with water makes this fantastic snack. It's 130 calories. It's 15 grams of protein. And when I got the product and I was starting to play around with recipes, I thought, oh, my mind just went crazy because there's so many things that you can do with soup. We use soup so much in recipes, right? We use broths and we use other types of soups for flavor. And so I thought for this recipe in particular, because often when you make stuffing, you use like a chicken broth. And I thought, oh, I'm going to put my instant soup in there. I'm going to boost the nutrition. I'm going to get some more protein in there. I'm going to get this incredible flavor, this chicken and vegetable flavor from my instant soup. Now, if you don't have this instant soup in your market, then I think a good substitute for this would be some PPP if you want to get some extra protein in your stuffed pumpkin. And then instead of the half a cup of water, you could use a half a cup of chicken broth, all right? So just to reiterate, so I've got 2 eggs, I've got a half a cup of water, a teaspoon of lemon juice. I'm adding 4 scoops of my Herbalife Nutrition instant soup chicken and vegetable flavor. So that's adding 30 grams of protein to my dish, right? Because I said 15 grams in 2 scoops. So I'm going to mix that up. And then I'm going to add a teaspoon of dried sage, which is pretty standard for stuffing. Sage is just such a delicious flavor, and it goes really well with all the other ingredients that we have. And I just want to mix this up enough so that it's smooth, and we're pretty much there. You'll see it's really thick, you know, and that's from the soup, of course, but it's really going to be perfect in our stuffing. So let me bring back all these ingredients here. Get that one out of the way, get this out of the way. All right, and then we're going to pour this on top of this grain mixture that we have and toss it up, and then we're just going to stuff it into the pumpkin. So this is pretty easy. I mean, it seems like a little bit of a project, but it's really not. The hardest part is waiting for it to cook because it takes a while for that pumpkin to cook. And then we're going to stir this up really well. And I'll tell you that just right now even, I mean, I'm just getting all these amazing aromas because I'm getting, of course, the flavor of the aroma of the cooked vegetables, and it's so pretty. That's the other thing before we've even cooked it. And then I'm getting, of course, the aroma from the soup, which is nice. It's going to add a nice savory note. And then I can tell that those dried cranberries are really going to add a lot too. All right. Now I'm going to bring back my pumpkin that I prepared before. And we're just going to go ahead and scoop this into our pumpkin. Now, as I said, if you are not using a pie pumpkin, and if you're using one of the other squashes, what you'll do is you're just going to cut your squash in half and put your filling inside. Or if you decide you don't want to do it in a squash, that's fine too. You can just do this in a baking dish and cover it with foil. It's not going to take as long to cook because, you know, what we've got here is really dense. It's going to take a lot for the heat to penetrate not only the filling but also the pumpkin itself, which is pretty dense. So this actually has to cook for about an hour and a half, or bake, I should say, in the oven for about an hour and a half. I have to say I'm pretty pleased with the way this worked out, because when I was testing this and I had so many different sizes and shapes of pumpkin, sometimes I had too much filling, sometimes I had too little. This one seemed to work out pretty well, so let me put that out of the way. All right, so this is done. We're going to replace the top. This is going to go in the oven for an hour, and then after an hour, what you're going to do is you're going to take the lid off and you're going to let it continue to bake for another half an hour, so a total of about 90 minutes. And then when it's done, what you'll be able to tell, because the pumpkin itself is going to be soft. You can stick a fork in it if you want to, but you'll be able to tell that it's soft. So to put this in the oven, I'm going to pull out the other one that I baked earlier today so you can see that. So that goes in the oven. And here is the masterpiece. And you know, what's so fun about this, as I said, is it's just really a beautiful thing to, you know, to serve in the fall. It's so fall-like. I put this on this plate with these leaves. I took these off of one of my grapevines, and in the fall they just make these amazing colors. And I thought, well, I'm going to just put that on my serving plate just for fun. All right, So couple things I want you to note when you look at this is, number one is, look how pretty the pumpkin itself is. It, you know, it got a little bit brown. I can tell just by touching it that it's soft and it's tender. And then, you know, when you bring it to the table and you kind of put the top off to the side like that, it's just such a beautiful presentation. Now, you have a couple choices when it comes to serving this. If you want to, you can just scoop it out. And if you do it that way, what you're going to do is you're going to be trying to scrape out not only the filling, but also some of the pumpkin itself. Because that's the beauty of this dish, is that you're getting this really wonderful savory stuffing, and yet you're getting that sweet taste from the pumpkin itself. So that's one way to do it. And in that case, you would just kind of stick your spoon down in here and then just, you know, really do your best to sort of scrape against the sides. And then what's going to happen is, as you pull that out, if I can do this, is you're going to see that we're going to get a little bit of pumpkin as well as a little bit of stuffing when we put that on the serving dish. So that's one way to do it. The other way to do it, I'm going to destroy this thing now, but the other way to do it is to cut this into wedges. And that's actually a really, once you've brought it to the table and everybody oohs and ahs over your beautiful stuffed pumpkin, then what you can do is you can actually just cut this entire thing, and I think this easily will make 6 wedges, if not 8. And be sure you cut all the way through. And then you can just cut a wedge almost like you would cut a pie. And you can serve it that way. And if I can get this out, it's a little bit tricky because you have to be sure that you cut all the way through to the bottom, and I can't tell if I'm there. And then you can serve it in these wedges, and it just looks so pretty on the plate. And as I said, if you're not used to eating these squashes, it's something that I encourage you to try because, as I said, they're very, very nutritious. Let's put that there so you can see it, and put this here. They're really, really nutritious, and they are delicious. So I have to eat with my big spoon because in all my planning I forgot to give myself a fork. But let me just very quickly tell you how good the stuffing is. It's very moist, but because I use the whole grains, I've got a little bit of chew in there, which I really love. I'm definitely getting the sweetness not only from the dried cranberries that we put in, but now I'm going to take a bite with the pumpkin. And with the pumpkin, the combination of the sweetness from the pumpkin, the savory from the filling is pretty amazing. Now, you might be asking yourself, is this a side dish? Is this a main dish? What do I do? Obviously, as a side dish, this is pretty hearty, right? Because you've got your grains and basically you've got your veggie with your squash. So if I were going to serve this as a side dish, I probably wouldn't serve a lot more with my meal. I mean, you know, maybe you want a little piece of cooked protein if you want to. But to me, I just think this makes a really fabulous entree. I mean, I would just serve this maybe with a green salad and call it dinner. And I don't think anybody would complain. It's really good. And in fact, when you find out what the nutritional value is of this delicious stuffed pumpkin, you may be tempted to serve this at your next dinner party. All right? So don't go away, because I will be right back to give you all the nutrition information on our wonderful stuffed pumpkin.